All right, everybody. So here is my first book review. My previous videos here on YouTube have been readings from my book chapters. So today we're going to do Whitley Strieber's debut horror novel, The Wolfen, from 1978. Note this is the novel, not the questionable movie with Edward James Olmos. So let's first start with the storyline. So it begins with two police officers getting ambushed and killed by unknown attackers in New York City junkyard in the late 1970s. Ambushed, killed, and possibly eaten. Partially eaten. They not possibly eaten, not at all. There's a cranky old school detective named George Wilson and his new female partner Becky Neff. They're assigned to investigate, and they soon discover the killings aren't the work of attack dogs trained by gangsters, which they first thought, but something worse. In New York City, humans are not at the top of the food chain, and the things that killed these people don't want to be exposed. So I'll first start with the good parts. So the protagonists are pretty smart. They figure out early on they're dealing with something inhuman and they're being hunted. The antagonists, they're not really call them villains because they're predatory animals, are intelligent enough to recognize witnesses and try to eliminate them. And Neff and Wilson are smart enough to take precautions. So the book is this giant cat and mouse game involving the titular Wolfen and two human detectives throughout New York City in the 1970s. And speaking of the 1970s, this book has a strong 1970s vibe. So, for example, Neff is one of the few female police officers dealing with homicide, which is more important in public. And she has a partner who really doesn't think she's up to, at least at first, as well as a police force as a whole. New York City is a cesspool of decaying neighborhoods and crime, which is about right for the time period, because my understanding that New York's decline began in the late 1970s. And there's a kind of a subplot involving a police officer being on the take from a gambling ring, which was also something that happened in the 1970s. So it's set very well in the specific time and place. Also, Strieber's antagonists, the Wolfen, are one of the more creative horror monsters I've ever seen. They're not werewolves, although they're the origin of the werewolf legend. They're not a pack of normal wolves that have adapted to live in the city like Cody's have. They're something entirely new, and if they were real, they would be something very dangerous. And they even work in the vampire legend into this as well. It's done very creatively. We're not talking Spider-Man 3 where they overload it. And it also touches on the historical role the Wolfen might have played in different cultures and different time periods, like the Native Americans. And there are several scenes in the book done from the point of view of the monsters, and they're really well done. It's poetic and fascinating. Like, there's no goofy infrared monster vision here. And the book, finally, is very well paced. It moves very quickly. And one of the main times I read ebooks is when I'm on the elliptical, and it didn't take very long to finish it while I was running. And also, finally, the book is really creepy. I'm fairly inured to movie and book scares. I've read enough horror books and seen enough horror movies that a lot doesn't faze me anymore. And there's still stuff that's well done. The ending in particular gives me the chills. Now, unfortunately, it's not all good. So, especially early on, there's a fair bit of telling and not showing. Sometimes, I'll admit, telling is necessary. So, author Mary Robin Cowell, in Writing Excuses, talked about, sometimes showing can take too long, you got to sum it up. But there are still some missed opportunities here, especially in the beginning. Also, I'd have still liked more scenery description, even though we certainly get plenty of it. Like, I'll compare this to Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities. And there's a portrait of New York City at roughly the same time, or perhaps a little later. And Bonfire of the Vanities, it's much more vivid. Also, we get kind of a love triangle partway through the book. And so that means somebody has to die. And so Strieber throws in some less savory aspects of the future dead person's character, I guess, to make us want this person to die. And I didn't think this was foreshadowed well enough. Like, they kind of just throw it in there. I will give this character an impressive death, though. That was cool. Now, the verdict. So, Wolfen was Whitley Strieber's first novel, and he did a lot of good work in the horror field, but then he kind of went off to La La Land talking about UFOs. So, hopefully he'll come back to this later, because the ending literally is world-changing, and it'd be nice to see what happens afterward, although Let's hope he does it really more carefully, because he also did a sequel to The Hunger, his vampire book, that I heard wasn't as good. And yeah, so I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I thought it was that good. All right, so I would definitely recommend checking it out. There's a link to this in the video notes. Ciao.